The girl could see the past of any person. When the neighbors came to ask about their missing child, they were stunned by what she revealed. Nastia seemed like an ordinary 17-year-old girl at first glance. She lived with her parents in a small village surrounded by dense forests and old wooden houses. Their home stood slightly on the outskirts, near a stream beyond which open fields began. Life in the village moved slowly and quietly. From afar, the hum of a tractor could sometimes be heard, and in the evenings, lamps lit up inside the houses, illuminating the old but cozy streets. Nastia loved her village, yet she often dreamed about the future. Since childhood, she had imagined herself helping people, being useful, and most of all, being loved. Her desire to bring good to others was sincere, but it was overshadowed by her unusual ability, which caused fear and suspicion among those around her. At times, she wondered why this gift had been given to her. Her dreams were simple but vivid. She wanted to study medicine to help the sick, or become a teacher to guide children. She wished people would value her for her kind heart, not avoid her because of the rumors spreading through the village. Recently, however, her dreams had blended with more personal feelings. Nastia had fallen in love with Maxim. Maxim, her classmate, was her complete opposite, tall, confident, with a warm smile. He easily connected with everyone around him. Nastia often watched him from afar at school, during village celebrations, or when he rode past her house on his bicycle. She understood that her feelings would likely remain unanswered. Maxim seemed too distant, too unreachable. Still, simply seeing his smile and hearing his laughter was enough for her. Deep down, she hoped that one day he might notice her. Every morning, as she got ready for school, Nastia imagined conversations with him, carefully choosing words she might say. But in class, everything felt more complicated. Maxim was always surrounded by friends, and her courage faded. Dreams of changing people's lives and growing closer to Maxim gave her the strength to keep moving forward. Reality, however, was far from her dreams. Her classmates avoided her, rarely meeting her eyes or speaking to her unless absolutely necessary. Even during group assignments, Nastia almost always ended up alone. It was all because of the rumors. Some said she could heal illnesses just by looking at someone. Others claimed she could see the future or talk to spirits. There was even a version that she was simply unstable. No one knew where these stories came from, but in a small village, they spread quickly. She whispers to herself, probably casting spells. Someone would mutter, "That's nonsense," a friend might reply, yet still glance at Nastia with unease. The woman everyone talked about, Baba Nadia, lived deep in the forest in a crooked old house. She avoided people, and people avoided her. Only Nastia visited her regularly. She loved listening to Nadia's stories about the past and about the village before fear drove her away. Nadia seemed lonely, but wise. She never spoke in detail about her own past, but it was clear something had happened that forced her to leave society behind. Nastia enjoyed hearing about herbs, strange signs hidden in nature, and the importance of staying kind to people even when they respond with cruelty. Yet this gift did not make Nastia happy. Instead, it pushed her further away from others. "Mom, why are people so afraid of what they don't understand?" Nastia once asked her mother, Ekaterina, while helping wash dishes in the kitchen. "Because it's easier to be afraid than to try to understand," her mother replied, turning to her. "But don't be afraid to be yourself." Those words brought some comfort, but Nastia still felt isolated. While others chatted and shared weekend plans, she sat apart, as if living in a different world. She tried not to let it bother her, but some nights she cried quietly into her pillow, realizing that no one truly wanted to understand her. Nastia met Baba Nadia by chance when she was about 10 years old. She and her friends were playing in the forest, and the other kids teased her, pushing her closer to the old woman's house, the one surrounded by frightening stories. They said the woman was a witch who could bring misfortune, or just as easily cure it. Nastia wasn't afraid. She stepped closer than the others and noticed an elderly woman in the window, watching with a thoughtful gaze. Scared? One of the boys shouted. But Nastya took another step forward. She had always been drawn to what others feared. That was how her visits to Baba Nadia began. For the first time, she felt someone looked at her, not like an ordinary child, but as if they knew something deeper about her. Over the years, their meetings became regular. Nastya went to Nadia when she needed silence or when her thoughts felt too heavy. The old woman's house stood at the edge of the forest, surrounded by wild bushes. Bundles of dried herbs lay nearby, and an old cat slept curled up on the porch. "Hello, Nastyona," Nadia said once, when the girl came in the evening. "Everything you're searching for." Nastya sat down on the bench by the porch. "I don't know what I'm searching for. Maybe answers." Nadia looked at her closely, with more understanding in her eyes than words. "It's hard for you. I know. People fear what they don't understand." Nastya nodded. She told Nadia about everything, about her abilities that frightened others, about the loneliness that followed her everywhere. Talking about how hard it was for her to make friends, she finally admitted in a trembling voice, "Sometimes I feel like this gift only makes everything worse. I can't ever just be normal." Nadia slowly pulled a small bundle of dried mint from her pocket and handed it to her. "It's not that simple, Nastya. A gift is not always a blessing, but it's not always a punishment either. It depends on how you choose to use it." "Can it be given away?" Nastya asked, hope flickering in her eyes. The old woman looked at her carefully, thinking for a long moment before answering. "Yes, it can. But think carefully. Why would you want to give it away? Just to be like everyone else? Are you sure that's truly what you want? Some people dream of abilities like yours. And you're ready to let yours go?" Nastya fell silent. A deep sense of unfairness filled her chest. "I just want people to stop being afraid of me. I want to be accepted." Nadia placed her weathered hand over the girl's. "With time, they will. But first, you must accept yourself. And your gift, you may need it more than you realize." Those words stayed with Nastya. Every time she walked home from old Nadia's house, she felt a little lighter, yet the questions never disappeared. Nadia's life had not been easy either. In rare, quiet moments, she would share fragments of her past. She had once lived in a village called Novi. Long ago, she failed to save the life of someone important. Though years had passed, the pain of that loss and the sting of injustice still lingered in her eyes. "You think this is easy for me?" Nadia once said, watching the sunset bleed across the sky. "I live because I know my gift is needed. If I had given it away, who would have helped these people?" Nastya listened without interrupting. She understood that her own path was only beginning, and perhaps one day she would face the same burden Nadia carried. Each visit left a mark on her soul. Sometimes she returned home inspired, other times weighed down with even more questions. But one thing she knew for certain, Baba Nadia was her mentor, and no matter how difficult her advice sounded, it was always true. One morning, an old gazelle van rattled into the village, packed with furniture and boxes. Nastya noticed it through the window as she sipped her tea. The vehicle stopped at the long abandoned house on the neighboring street. "Mom, I think we have new neighbors." She called into the kitchen, where her mother was washing dishes. "Really? We should find out who they are," Ekaterina replied, drying her hands. Nastya looked outside again. A thin woman, around 35, stepped out of the van. Her face looked exhausted. She held tightly to the hand of a boy about 10 years old. The boy stood stiffly beside her, tense and quiet. The woman kept glancing around nervously, murmuring something under her breath. "Probably from the city," her mother said, peering out the window. "Who knows what they've been through? Life doesn't bring people here without a reason." But Nastya's attention was fixed on the boy. His name, she would soon learn, was Alyosha. He looked closed off, almost guarded, but there was something alive in his eyes, something searching. She felt an unexpected pull toward him. She wanted to be his friend. Then doubt crept in. People usually avoided her, Why would he be any different? A few days later, she saw them again outside the village store. Alyosha gave her a polite nod before quickly lowering his gaze. Nastya wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in her throat. That evening at dinner, she asked her parents, "Do you know anything about the new neighbors?" Her father set down his spoon. "The woman's name is Maria. Brought her son here. Left her husband. No one knows why." Nastya couldn't stop thinking about them. Maria kept her distance from everyone, as if carefully guarding her life from strangers. Later that evening, as Nastya was walking home along the narrow path after visiting Nadia, she thought she heard something unusual in the distance. The village was quiet, only the occasional bark of a dog breaking the silence. When she stepped inside her house, she immediately sensed something was wrong. Her father was sitting at the table, staring blankly ahead. The stove had gone cold. The kitchen felt heavy. "Dad, what happened?" He exhaled slowly. "Maria's son, he drowned." Nastya's heart seemed to stop. "Drowned? Where?" "By the river. No one knows exactly how. They say he went there alone. He didn't know how to swim. The words didn't make sense. Alyosha, alone at the river?" At dinner, no one spoke. Later, her mother returned home with red, swollen eyes. "I went to see Maria," Ekaterina said quietly. "She doesn't believe it was an accident. She says Alyosha would never go to the river by himself." "What about the police?" Nastya asked. "They believe it was an accident. They say he was too young, didn't understand the danger. But Maria, she can't accept that." Nastya lay awake that night. Nadia's voice echoed in her mind. People are always afraid of what they don't understand. Maria's grief felt deeper than shock. It was as if she sensed something else, something hidden beneath the surface. Was it a mother's intuition? Or did she know, in her heart, that Alyosha would never have gone there alone? Sleep never came. A quiet certainty settled over Nastya. This story wasn't over. Alyosha's funeral passed in heavy silence. Nastya stood slightly apart beside her mother. Only a few people had come: neighbors, the village elder, 2 workers from the local shop. Everyone spoke in whispers, as if afraid to disturb something fragile and sacred. Maria could barely stand. Dark circles framed her hollow eyes. Her hands trembled. An elderly neighbor held her by the elbow, keeping her upright. When the coffin was lowered into the ground, Maria covered her face and broke into sobs. Her cries tore through the silence, so raw and heartbreaking that people looked away, unable to witness her pain. But Nastya couldn't look away, and deep inside she felt a growing, unbearable sense of guilt, though she didn't yet understand why. She kept replaying that moment in her mind. Why hadn't she gone up to Alyosha while there was still time? Maybe it was because she felt she should have sensed something, should have felt the danger coming. She stood in silence, her head lowered, unable to find a single word that could comfort Maria. After the funeral, she and her mother decided to visit her. Ekaterina insisted they bring a pie and some fresh bread. "At least it will give her a little strength," she said softly. When they approached Maria's house, Nastya noticed the curtains were tightly drawn, shutting out the daylight. The front door was slightly open. Ekaterina knocked, but there was no answer. After a hesitant glance at each other, they stepped inside. The house was in complete disarray. Clothes and papers were scattered across the floor. Half-eaten dishes sat untouched on the table. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as if despair itself had soaked into the walls. Maria was sitting on the floor in the corner of the room, clutching a pillow to her chest. She looked as though she hadn't slept in days. "Maria, we brought you some food," Ekaterina said gently, approaching her with care. Maria slowly lifted her eyes. Her gaze was empty, hollow. But the moment she saw Nastya, something changed. She sprang to her feet, the pillow dropping to the floor. "Nastya, you have to help me," she cried, grabbing the girl's hands. Nastya glanced at her mother, then back at Maria. "How can I help you?" "You can speak to spirits. I know you can. You have to contact Alyosha. I need to know what really happened." Maria's voice trembled, but there was more desperation than fear in it. Nastya lowered her eyes. Her abilities had always been a painful subject for her, something she carried like a secret weight. Now she didn't know what to say. Maria, I can't. Not yet. 40 days have to pass before I can try. 40 days? Maria clutched her head, her voice rising. How am I supposed to live 40 days without knowing the truth? I understand how much you're hurting, Nastya said quietly, but right now it's impossible. I promise I'll do everything I can when the time comes. Ekaterina stepped forward and gently wrapped her arms around Maria's shoulders. We'll be here for you. You'll get through this. But Nastya is right. We have to wait. Maria froze for a moment, and then she broke down. Her sobs were deep and piercing, as if every tear cost her unimaginable effort. Ekaterina helped her to the couch, while Nastya quietly began picking up the scattered belongings, trying to bring some order back into the broken home. Before they left, Nastya looked at Maria once more. I promise I'll help you. Just a little longer. Maria didn't answer. She simply nodded, her head bowed. Nastya felt a crushing weight in her chest. She knew she had taken on a tremendous responsibility, and she feared she might not be strong enough to fulfill it. 40 days passed. Nastya remembered the deadline as clearly as Maria did. With each passing day, the tension seemed to grow heavier. Maria came to their home twice during those weeks, her patience hanging by a thread. Then, on the 41st day, early in the morning, someone knocked on their door. Nastya opened it and saw Maria standing there. She looked like she hadn't slept all night. Dark shadows framed her eyes. Her lips trembled. You promised, she said hoarsely. Nastya nodded. I'm ready. Let's sit down. She led Maria into the living room. Ekaterina watched silently from the side, but didn't interfere. Nastya knew her mother was worried, but she stayed quiet so as not to distract her. Sit down, Nastya said gently. Close your eyes and try not to think about anything bad. Maria obeyed, nervously wringing her hands. Nastya stood behind her, placing her hands on Maria's shoulders. She began whispering softly, her voice steady, almost like a prayer. Silence filled the room, broken only by the slow ticking of an old clock. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. A cold sweat formed on Nastya's forehead. She took a deep breath, focusing all her thoughts. She knew this would not be easy, but she also knew how much it meant to Maria. Then, suddenly, the room seemed to grow slightly darker. Maria straightened abruptly, her breathing quickening. Nastya continued whispering without stopping. He's here, she finally murmured. Maria opened her eyes and stared ahead. In the corner of the room, a faint, barely visible figure began to take shape. It was Alyosha. He looked just as she remembered him the last time she saw him, the same jacket, the same gentle smile. But there was sadness in his eyes. Mom, he said, his voice clear, as if he were standing right beside her. Maria covered her mouth to keep from screaming. Alyosha, my boy, she whispered through her tears. Why? What happened? He took a step forward, but it was as though something invisible held him back. Mom, I would never have gone to the river by myself, he said quietly. It was Dad. Maria froze. Mikhail? He was there? Her voice broke into a whisper. Yes, Alyosha continued. He found me that day. He said he wanted to take me into the city, but I refused. He got angry. He started yelling. Maria sat in stunned silence, her shoulders trembling. He hit me, Mom. Then he tried to force me into the car. I was scared. I jumped out while he was driving. I fell hard. I hit my head. The room felt suffocating. He realized I wouldn't survive. So he took me to the river. He wanted it to look like an accident. Tears streamed down Maria's face. Her fists clenched as she struggled to process the horror of what she was hearing. Alyosha, how can I prove this? How can I prove he did it? She asked, staring straight at her son. Alyosha paused for a moment, as if gathering strength. His lighter, he said. It fell under the table at our house when he came to get me. His fingerprints are still on it, and neighbor Ivan saw him that day. Dad asked him for directions to our house. Maria stared at her son, barely able to believe her ears. Her hands trembled, her eyes locked on his fading figure. "Thank you, my boy, at last," she forced the words out. Nastya, who had been standing behind her the whole time, felt the spirit beginning to fade. He smiled at his mother and said softly, "Don't cry, Mom. Everything will be okay." His image slowly dissolved until it vanished completely. The room grew bright again, as if nothing unusual had happened. Maria sat frozen, staring into empty space. Nastya gently touched her shoulder. "It's over. Now you know the truth." Maria covered her face with her hands and quietly broke down. She cried not only from grief, but also from relief that she finally knew what had happened to her son. The day after speaking with Alyosha's spirit, Maria gathered all her courage and went to the local police station. She looked exhausted, but her eyes burned with determination. The small station stood in the center of the village. A wall clock ticked loudly in the corner. The officer lazily flipped through papers, then glanced at her over his glasses. "How can I help you?" "I want to file a report," Maria said firmly. The officer set the papers aside and motioned for her to sit. "I'm listening." Maria took a deep breath. "My son, Alexei, he didn't drown by accident. His former stepfather, Mikhail, is responsible." "That's a serious accusation," the officer said cautiously. "We have a report stating it was an accident." "I'm sure," Maria replied. "I have evidence." The officer crossed his arms, clearly skeptical. "And what evidence would that be?" Maria told him about the lighter Mikhail had left under the table. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. She also mentioned a neighbor, Ivan, who had seen Mikhail on the day Alyosha died. "I found the lighter," she added. "His fingerprints should be on it." The officer rubbed his head and sighed. "Listen, I don't know what you were told, but this may not be enough. And Ivan, he sometimes gets confused in his statements. I won't back down," Maria said firmly. "Check the fingerprints." "Question Ivan." Still doubtful, the officer stood and walked to the file cabinet. "All right, I'll file the report, but I can't promise it will lead anywhere." Maria watched him slowly fill out the paperwork. Her patience was wearing thin, but she knew she had to stay calm. A few days later, the police examined the lighter. Their skepticism faded when the forensic results came back. The fingerprints belonged to Mikhail. It was a crucial piece of evidence. Later, Ivan confirmed that he had seen Mikhail in the village on the day Alyosha died. "Yes, he asked me for directions to Maria's house," the old man said, stroking his gray beard. "Asked if she still lived there. I showed him the way. Thought nothing of it at the time." These statements, along with the lighter, forced the police to reconsider the case. They began gathering materials to open a criminal investigation. For the first time in a long while, Maria felt hope. Justice wouldn't bring her son back, but it was the only way she could find peace. Soon, the truth began to surface. Rumors spread quickly through the village. People whispered on the streets, exchanging uneasy looks. "He was gone for years," they murmured, and the moment he came back, tragedy followed. Maria stayed home, avoiding the village. She didn't need to go anywhere. Knowing the truth was close was enough. One morning, a police car pulled up to her house. From the window, she saw officers escorting Mikhail out of the vehicle. He looked disheveled, but tried to appear confident. "This is a mistake," he shouted. "I had nothing to do with it." His words rang hollow. No one came to his defense, not even those who had once judged Maria harshly. Maria watched silently from the window. She didn't step outside, but Nastya could feel her tension. Maria's face was rigid, her eyes filled with resolve. When the police finally drove away with Mikhail, she went back inside without saying a word. Later, Nastya sat in her room, thinking about everything that had happened. Her emotions were tangled. She was glad her ability had helped uncover the truth, yet the weight of what she had witnessed pressed heavily on her. That evening, she spoke to her mother. "Mom, I don't know how to feel about this. The truth is out, but the cost, it's too high." Ekaterina placed a hand on her shoulder. "Nastya, You didn't cause the pain. You helped reveal the truth. People deserve it, even when it's bitter. In the village, attitudes toward Nastya began to change. People no longer looked at her with fear. Some even thanked her for helping Maria. But accepting this was difficult for Nastya. I never wanted to be the center of attention, she admitted to Baba Nadia when she visited her a few days later. My gift doesn't make me happy. Baba Nadia listened in silence, then said, A gift is always a burden, Nastyona. But you're carrying it. You did what had to be done, and not everyone can do that. Her words brought Nastya a small sense of calm. She was beginning to understand that her abilities were not a curse alone, but a responsibility she could no longer ignore. She began to understand that her gift was not only a burden, but also a chance to truly help others. Deep down, she hoped that through it, she could change people's lives for the better. Mikhail was taken away for further investigation. His arrest became the main topic of conversation in the village for weeks. But Nastya avoided those discussions. It was enough for her to know that the truth had come out, and that Maria could finally begin to live again. After the arrest, life in the village slowly returned to its usual rhythm. But something had changed. Nastya felt it everywhere. The same people who once avoided her now approached her. They asked questions. Sometimes they even thanked her, especially those who had once crossed the street to avoid her gaze. The first to come was Aunt Galia, the outspoken elderly neighbor known for her blunt honesty. Nastya was sitting on a bench outside her house, reading, when Galia approached, wiping her hands on her apron. Nastya, can I speak to you for a minute? She asked cautiously. Of course. Nastya closed her book and stood. Galia glanced around to make sure no one was listening. It's about my nephew. A terrible situation. An important document went missing. We've searched everywhere. He's worried sick. Could you, well, like you did with Alyosha, take a look? See where it might be? At first, Nastya hesitated. Then she nodded. I'll try, but it doesn't always work. Galia nodded quickly. If it doesn't, that's fine. Just please try. A few days later, the document was found hidden beneath the upholstery of an old chair. After that, the rumors spread even faster. People began coming with all sorts of requests. Someone had lost a cow. Someone else wanted to know when an illness would finally pass. Nastya did her best to help, but she was careful not to promise too much. She was afraid of disappointing them. One afternoon, someone knocked at her door, someone she never expected to see there. It was the wife of the very classmate she had once secretly been in love with. The woman looked tense, but when she saw Nastya, she forced a small smile. Hi, Nastya. Could I ask you for help? She said awkwardly, fidgeting with her purse. Of course. Please, come in. What happened? The woman sat on the edge of a chair, holding a photograph in her hands. This is my brother. He disappeared 3 years ago. We searched, but nothing. I can't live with not knowing. Could you find out anything at all? Nastya took the photograph and immediately felt uneasy. Helping with something like this was different. The weight of expectation pressed heavily on her. I'll try, she said quietly, but I can't promise results. She focused, holding the picture carefully. She felt warmth, an emotional trace, but no clear answers came. Nothing she could say with certainty. I'm sorry, she finally whispered, returning the photo. I can't see anything right now. Maybe something will come later, but not now. The woman nodded. Disappointment was visible in her eyes, but she tried to hide it. I understand. Thank you for trying. She paused at the door. You know, Maxime always said you were a very good person. Now I see why. Nastya felt her heart tighten. The words were unexpected, gentle, sincere. She smiled softly as the woman left. After that, even more villagers began coming to her. The same people who had once feared her now saw her as someone who could help. Nastya felt her life shifting, slowly but surely. But with that shift came responsibility. She realized her gift wasn't just something she carried, it was something she had to protect and use wisely. Months passed. The village felt smaller to her now. Too small. People no longer avoided her, they sought her out. But she wanted more. She wanted to study, to understand her abilities, to help people on a deeper level. One evening at dinner, she spoke. "Mom, I want to move to the city and apply to a university." Ekaterina put down her fork and looked at her carefully. "Are you sure? That's a big change. The city is different." "I know," Nastya said firmly, "but I feel like I have to try." Her father, Pyotr, sighed, but there was pride in his voice. "We always knew you were special. If this is what you want, we won't stop you." A few weeks later, Nastya left for a nearby city. She enrolled in the local university, choosing the psychology department. Her decision didn't surprise her parents. She had always wanted to understand people, their fears, their pain, their hidden emotions. The first months in the city were not easy. She rented a small dorm room and struggled to adjust to the noise and constant motion. For the first time, no one knew about her gift. She felt ordinary. But that didn't last long. One evening, her roommate Sveta noticed Nastya sitting quietly with a photograph in her hands, whispering softly as if speaking to someone unseen. "Wait, can you actually talk to spirits?" Sveta asked half-jokingly. Nastya froze, unsure what to say, but Sveta quickly raised her hands. "Hey, don't worry, I won't tell anyone. It's just, I have a problem." That was how Nastya's new life truly began. Sveta asked her to help find a family heirloom that had gone missing during their move. Nastya agreed to try. After focusing carefully, she sensed that the item had been accidentally packed into a box labeled as junk. Soon enough, Sveta found it exactly there. Word spread quickly among the students. Classmates began approaching her, at first shyly, then openly. Some had lost belongings. Others were desperate for answers to personal questions. Once, she even helped a young man who felt completely lost and overwhelmed, guiding him toward clarity when he couldn't see a way forward himself. And with every request, Nastya felt it more clearly than ever. Her gift was no longer something she wished to escape. It was becoming the very thing that defined her path. She once helped a professor who had lost an important document. He was so grateful that he gifted her a psychology book with a personal autograph. But the whispers didn't stop at the university. One evening, a man from a neighboring district showed up at her dormitory. "You're Nastya? I was told you can help." At first she was surprised, but she agreed to listen. He explained that he had been searching for an old letter his father had written before his death. It had vanished years ago, and with it, a piece of closure he desperately needed. Nastya helped him find it. That case became the beginning of her reputation beyond the university walls. Over time, people from other regions began reaching out. Some called. Others traveled long distances just to see her in person. Nastya tried to help everyone, while still keeping up with her studies and maintaining some balance in her personal life. One day, she received a letter from Maria. Maria thanked her for everything she had done. "Nastya, you didn't just help me learn the truth. You gave me the strength to keep living. I hope you continue using your gift for good. Thank you for everything." Those words deeply inspired her. She realized she had made the right decision by moving to the city. Now she could help not only her small village, but people from far away. As her knowledge and experience expanded, her life grew fuller, and somehow everything felt as though it was unfolding exactly as it should. Yet, no matter how busy city life became, Nastya never returned to her village without visiting Baba Nadia. The village was still home. And Nadia was the one who had always helped her find her strength when doubt crept in. This time her return felt different. She sensed she needed to share both her fears and her successes. Early in the morning, Nastya walked into the forest. The path leading to Nadia's house looked just as it had in her childhood, only slightly overgrown now. On the porch of the old house sat the same cat that had always greeted her before. "You're still here," Nastya whispered, gently stroking its head. The door opened before she could knock. Baba Nadia stood on the threshold, not surprised at all, as if she had been expecting her. "Come in, child." I knew you'd be back soon, she said, with her soft yet piercing smile. Inside, everything was exactly as Nastya remembered. Bundles of dried herbs hanging from the walls, a small table by the window, a kettle humming gently on the stove. She sat down, and Nadia slid a cup of hot tea toward her. "So, how is life in the city?" Nadia asked, sitting across from her. Nastya began telling her everything, about getting into university, about helping people, about how her abilities were drawing more and more attention. Nadia listened quietly, nodding at the right moments. "You knew it would turn out this way, didn't you?" Nastya suddenly asked. Nadia looked at her carefully, holding her gaze. "I did. That's why I chose you. You see, a gift is not just a talent, it's a responsibility. People fear it, but they also need it. I always knew you had the strength to carry it." Nastya thought about her words. "But why me? Wasn't it just chance?" Nadia slowly shook her head. "No, Nastya. Things like this are never accidental. I needed a successor, someone who could continue what I've done all my life. I saw it in you from the first day you came to me." Warmth spread through Nastya's chest. For so long her gift had felt like a burden. Now it felt like purpose, and yet doubt still lingered. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not doing enough, or maybe I'm doing too much. What if I make a mistake?" she admitted quietly. Nadia took her hand. "Mistakes are part of the journey, child. You're already doing what matters. You're learning. You're helping. Doubts will always exist. The important thing is not to let them stop you." After tea, Nadia led her to an old book resting on a shelf. It was an ancient folio filled with notes about herbs, rituals, and years of observations. Nadia opened it and pointed to a blank page. "This is for you. Write down what you learned. I once wrote these pages for you. Now it's your turn to leave something behind for those who come after." Nastya gently ran her fingers across the empty page. It felt like more than a book. It was a thread connecting generations, something larger than either of them. "Thank you, Grandma," she said softly. Nadia smiled warmly. "You are my best student. Remember this, people won't always be grateful. But that doesn't mean your work is pointless. You make the world better, even when no one notices." When Nastya left, her heart felt lighter. Nadia had given her more than knowledge. She had given her certainty that her path was the right one. Back in the city, Nastya began recording her observations and lessons carefully. She knew that one day she would pass them on to someone else, someone ready to continue the path. Winter arrived in the village, and the first snow fell softly over the rooftops. As always, Nastya helped her mother decorate the house for New Year's. Ekaterina tried to create warmth and comfort, hanging garlands, fluffing pillows on the sofa, baking fragrant pastries in the oven. "Where should we put the tree this year?" she asked. The day felt ordinary, peaceful, until a large black car drove into the yard. "Who could that be?" Pyotr muttered, peering out the window. Nastya felt it immediately, that quiet electric sense that something important was about to happen. Ekaterina glanced outside and suddenly went pale. She couldn't speak. Standing on the doorstep were her parents, whom she hadn't seen in many years. "Mom, Dad," Ekaterina whispered, hardly believing her eyes. They had aged. Her mother's once stern, severe face now looked softer, her eyes filled with regret. Her father stood silently beside her, uncertainty written across his features as snowflakes settled on his coat. And in that frozen moment, as the winter air hung still around them, it felt as though the past itself had come knocking at their door. Once strong and stubborn, he now stood hunched, leaning heavily on a cane. "Hello, Ketya," her mother said softly as she stepped closer. Ekaterina didn't move. Pyotr and Nastya watched carefully from the side, afraid to breathe. "How are you? Why are you here?" Ekaterina finally asked. Her mother came closer still. "We found your address. Forgive us, Katya, for everything." Tears filled Ekaterina's eyes. She never expected to hear those words. Years of resentment, pain, and silence suddenly seemed to melt away. "Mom, Dad, I waited so many years to hear this," she whispered, wrapping her arms around her mother. Her father stepped forward, cleared his throat awkwardly, and placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "We're old now, Ketya. We've understood a lot. Can you forgive us?" She nodded and embraced him too. It was their first reconciliation in so many years. Nastya watched with warmth in her chest. She knew how much this moment meant to her mother. "Come inside, don't stand in the cold," Pyotr said, trying to ease the tension. Once inside, the strained silence slowly dissolved. Words began to flow on their own. Ekaterina's mother spoke first. "We were wrong back then. Too stubborn, too proud. But now we see. You're happy. And this girl, Nastya, she's wonderful." Ekaterina looked at Nastya with love. "She's the best thing that ever happened in our lives." Nastya smiled, her heart filling with warmth. "Thank you, Grandma," she said, calling her that for the first time. They talked late into the evening. Ekaterina's parents spoke about the years they suffered, but never found the courage to take the first step. Ekaterina shared how she built her life with Pyotr despite all the hardships. "We were wrong, Katya," her mother said again, "and you did well. You chose love and built a family." Ekaterina exhaled slowly. "You said it. And I don't hold any resentment. What matters is that you're here." Later, when the house grew quiet and everyone went to sleep, Nastya helped her mother clear the table. "Are you happy, Mom?" she asked softly. Ekaterina nodded with a smile. "Yes, Nastya. Very." That night, the house was filled not only with the warmth of the stove, but with the warmth of forgiveness. For Ekaterina, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where the past was no longer a source of pain, but a step toward healing. After the family's reconciliation, Nastya's home felt even cozier. Snow fell quietly outside the window. Firewood crackled in the stove, and the air carried the scent of pies Ekaterina was baking. Nastya sat in her room, looking at an old book left to her by Grandma Nadia. Her thoughts spun around how much life had changed in recent years. Once she saw her gift as a heavy burden that kept her from living normally. She believed it would leave her lonely, misunderstood, always an outsider. But now everything was different. She saw how her abilities helped others, how they could bring clarity even in the most tangled situations. She understood it wasn't a curse, it was a calling. She remembered her grandmother's words. "A gift is a responsibility. If you accept it with an open heart, it becomes your strength." Now those words sounded different. Her gift no longer frightened her. It had become a tool to make the world even slightly a better place. She opened the book and flipped through the pages filled with notes about rituals and herbs. One line struck her deeply. Listen not only to what people say, but to what they cannot say. Nastya thought of everyone she had helped. Maria finally found peace after the tragedy with Alyosha. The villagers no longer avoided her. They came for advice. Even in the city, people sought her out, including those who once didn't believe in anything like this. She realized her mission wasn't just to find lost things or give answers. Her true purpose was to give people hope. Even if she couldn't change the past, she could help others carry its weight. "Nastya, where are you?" her mother's voice called from the kitchen. Nastya smiled, closed the book, and went into the living room. Pyotr and Ekaterina were discussing what gifts they would prepare for Christmas guests. Ekaterina noticed her daughter's thoughtful expression. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Nastya shook her head and sat beside her. "No, Mom. I'm just thinking about how much everything has changed lately." Pyotr smiled. "You've grown, Nastya, and not just on the outside. We always knew you were special." Ekaterina took her hand. "We're proud of you, sweetheart, and I know you'll do a lot of good." Those words touched Nastya deeply. She understood that her mission wasn't only to help people, but to be a source of support for those who needed it most. Everyone she helped became part of her life, and she was grateful for that. When night fell, Nastya was alone again in her room. She looked out the window as snow covered the village with a soft white blanket. Her heart was filled with calm and certainty. She took a sheet of paper and began to write. This time it wasn't a ritual or notes about herbs, it was her own thoughts about life, about people, about her calling. She wanted to leave something behind for those who might one day face the same doubts she once had. A gift is not just an ability, it is a choice. A choice to help, to understand, and to carry light even into the darkest moments. And if you can make even one person a little happier, then everything has meaning. Your life already has meaning. Nastya felt her soul fill with warmth. Deep down, she understood that her journey was only beginning, but now, for the first time, she was ready to move forward. Spring had just begun to settle in when a moving truck pulled onto the neighboring street. From her bedroom window, Nastya watched strangers unload furniture. The large old house that had stood empty for years was finally coming back to life. She noticed a middle-aged man, a woman in a bright coat, and a little girl about 8 years old with dark braids. The girl clutched a teddy bear and argued softly with her mother about something. The wind carried fragments of their voices, but not enough to make sense of them. "We have new neighbors?" Nastya asked, leaning closer to the glass. Ekaterina set the kettle on the stove and joined her at the window. "Looks like it. We should probably go introduce ourselves." But a strange tension tightened in Nastya's chest. Something about the scene unsettled her. On the surface, they looked like any ordinary family. Yet the woman kept glancing over her shoulder, nervously adjusting the coat slipping from her shoulders, as if she expected someone to be watching. "Who do you think they are?" Nastya asked quietly, unable to look away. "We'll find out soon enough," Ekaterina replied with a small shrug. "People from the city don't usually move out here without a reason." The next day, the new neighbor came by. She introduced herself as Tatiana and brought a homemade pie as a gesture of goodwill. She smiled politely, spoke gently, but her eyes were restless, scanning the room as if searching for something unseen. "It's so quiet here," Tatiana began, sitting at the table. "We were exhausted by the city noise. We decided to move closer to nature. My husband thinks it will be better for our daughter." Ekaterina nodded, pouring her tea. "I understand, but life here has its own challenges. How do you like the house?" "The house is good," Tatiana said, then paused. "It's just sometimes I feel uneasy." Nastya caught that word immediately. "Uneasy. Why?" she asked softly. Tatiana looked at her for a moment, then lowered her eyes. "I don't know. Maybe it's just nerves. Or maybe the house doesn't feel like ours yet." After she left, Nastya couldn't stop thinking about that conversation. The tension inside her only grew stronger. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it. The neighbors slowly settled in, yet their house was almost always lit up, even late into the night. Sometimes Nastya would see Tatiana sitting by the window, a cup in her hands, staring into the darkness as if expecting something to emerge from it. That anxious gaze lingered in Nastya's mind long after she stepped away from the glass. Several weeks later, there was a knock at Nastya's door. When she opened it, a tall man with an exhausted face stood on the porch. His eyes looked hollow, as though he hadn't slept in days. In his trembling hands, he held a photograph of a young woman. "You're Nastya?" he asked. "They told me you might be able to help." She nodded and invited him inside. "What happened?" He took a heavy breath and handed her the photograph. "This is my fiancée, Anna. She disappeared 3 months ago. We've searched everywhere. No leads, no answers. I just need to know what happened to her." Nastya studied the photo. The young woman in the picture looked happy, but behind her smile was a shadow, a quiet sadness that hadn't fully surfaced. A familiar chill ran through Nastya. "I'll try," she whispered. She asked the man to sit and close his eyes so she could focus. Holding the photograph, she concentrated. At first there was nothing. Then it came, a wave of cold, a long road, a dark forest at night, a lone woman walking, calling for help, but no sound escaping her lips. The silence was suffocating. Nastya gasped softly and opened her eyes. A heavy weight pressed against her chest. She went far away, Nastya said gently. She's not here anymore. The man froze. Are you sure? Nastya nodded. She's no longer with us, but she wants you to know it wasn't your fault. Circumstances took her from you. Things you couldn't have prevented. He buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. I always thought I could have protected her. You did everything you could, Nastya said, leaning closer. She knew you loved her. He stayed a few more minutes, slowly regaining his composure. Before leaving, he looked at her with quiet gratitude. Thank you. You gave me what I was searching for. Answers. After he left, Nastya remained seated for a long time, replaying everything in her mind. She knew her gift didn't always bring comfort. Sometimes it brought painful truth. But even truth, no matter how heavy, helped people face reality. This was her mission, and she accepted it with an open heart. Across the street, the lights in the neighbor's house still burned brightly against the night. Nastya felt it clearly now. Soon, she would be needed there too. And this time, she was ready. Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more suspenseful stories like this.